I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Welcome to another episode of Old School. Today we go back to my conversation with Seth Ferranti, a former federal prisoner who served a 25-year mandatory minimum sentence at the age of 22 for cannabis and LSD distribution. He spent those years becoming a writer, a journalist, and a filmmaker. This episode goes back to his entry into the drug world, how he draws a line, a really hard line between an addict and an outlaw, and it puts his case inside the world war on drugs specifically, talking about that mandatory minimum that was designed to target urban crack markets, but ended up sweeping up a white kid in the Deadhead scene. So please enjoy.
Military brat, LSD kingpin, fugitive on the U.S. Marshal's top 15 most wanted list, writer behind bars, journalist, and filmmaker are all roles Seth Ferranti has filled at one point in life. The self-described outlaw and ahead-of-his-time activist faced a highly publicized and lengthy prison sentence due to the DEA's early 90s crackdown on LSD.
My name's Seth Ferranti. I got a 25-year sentence when I was 22 for selling cannabis and psychedelics, and now I make films.
Where would you say your story of being lost begins?
I think at the age of 13, that's when I started experimenting with drugs. You know, I grew up with a man who adopted me that I thought was my father, that I called dad. And it was like that age at 13 where there was kind of some friction between me and him. My mom disclosed that, you know, I did have a biological father. And I had met him randomly like a couple times, but I didn't have any relationship with him. Grew up in the suburbs. I was playing sports, got good grades. You know, I was in the choir, whatever, if you want to call that emotional angst or that discovery, that was kind of like the tipping point.
That's a whole identity crisis, right? Like the person that you thought was your father is not your father. How did that impact what choices you made in the immediate and far future?
I'd say from 13, it was kind of like a downward spiral, you know, into the drug world. I never considered myself an addict, although society might have branded me an addict. But I was doing like cannabis and psychedelics, which I've always found like spiritual, medicinal. I mean, it was illegal. So I went down that criminal side of the road and I was reckless. I didn't really care. Luckily, I never got into like hard drugs because kind of the psychedelics, counterculture, the Deadhead community, that was kind of my scene.
In some ways, the subculture that formed around the Grateful Dead in the 1970s was unique, with fans following the group from venue to venue, for each show was partly improvised. But the vibe created in this space was also indicative of the era and deeply influenced by the use of cannabis, LSD, and other psychedelics, which contributed to a secular kind of spirituality in the scene.
You were very young to be in the drug scene. Was that interesting, intriguing, exciting, scary? Like, what did that look like for you at such a young age?
You know, when you're a kid, you know, you're always trying to be older than you are. I was dealing with this, you know, identity crisis or betrayal from 13, and I was kind of self-medicating with cannabis and other drugs. I was money motivated, so that played a big part. And really, I didn't care. I didn't care about myself.
What do you mean you didn't care about yourself?
You know, if you feel people didn't care about you or people didn't tell you the truth or if something was hidden from you, it makes you feel like maybe you're worthless. It was like a rebel without a cause, but, you know, I did have a cause in a way because, you know, I was a cannabis psychedelic supporter. I feel justified in a way, you know, because of where we're at today, you know, 30-something years later.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that you took a very like particular route into the alternative medicine world. Instead of going the opiate route, you went the Deadhead route. Can you describe to me what it was about that world that attracted you at that time?
I think it was a freedom, maybe the whole thing from the 60s. I mean, the music was okay. I wasn't a big, like some of my friends that are Deadheads are like die hard for the music. You know, I broke laws that I thought were wrong, so I was an outlaw. Once I got in trouble, once I got busted, and once I got involved in this and the law came in, and they put so many stereotypes on you, you know, you like doubt like your whole existence, you know, like everything I thought, you know, it's wrong because I got this sentence, you know, I'm a drug addict, I'm a criminal, I'm this, I'm that. As a kid, you know, you have that bravado I was attracted to the outlaw scene. I was attracted to the drug dealing. And like I said, I wasn't into like the coke and heroin stuff. So it just seemed like a kinder, tamer drug dealing world to me.
I mean, let's also recall that you were very young. The science shows that anyone who's under 25 is much more impulsive, less reflective sort of person just because their brains are not fully developed. That idea of being self-reflective in that moment or of having this broad perspective of what this would all mean for your life was just kind of out of reach for you at the time. I could totally see that. I think a lot of us can relate to the fact that we don't really want to follow laws that don't make sense to us. A lot of people break those kind of laws all the time. They just don't happen to do it in the height of the drug war. I think maybe we should set the stage a little bit and talk about when this was happening. Can you paint the picture of when this was happening and how that particular moment in history impacted you personally?
My case was 1991. They started like the recent episode of the drug war around like 1988 when they passed this. It was like this big omnibus criminal act, and it made all the mandatory minimums. It made all the federal sentencing guidelines. And basically, those laws were aimed at targeting African Americans for the crack trade from 85 to probably like 88. That's when like the crack epidemic, erupted like in New York, all the big cities and stuff. They were scared of narco-terrorism, and they had these African-American gangs slinging crack and shooting at cops and stuff like this. So they put the hammer down hard.
When President Nixon declared drug abuse public enemy number one in 1971, the media quickly began referring to the effort as the war on drugs. Under the Reagan administration, the battle flag was raised once again as funding for FBI drug enforcement units went from $8 to $95 million, and Nancy Reagan promoted complete abstinence from drugs with her Just Say No campaign. But while the Controlled Substances Act placed cannabis and LSD as Schedule I drugs, alongside heroin and cocaine, they weren't associated with the skyrocketing murder rates in cities such as New York. That led law enforcement to target low-income black neighborhoods, where crack was more prevalent than cocaine. In 1986, Time magazine named crack cocaine Issue of the Year. According to FBI data, black youth comprised 14.5% of all drug arrests in 1980, but in 1990, the percentage shot to 48.8%.
But then after like 3 years, people started calling out the laws, saying these are racist laws. You're only using these laws to target inner city blacks. So, once that happened, then like the DEA and the other federal agencies, they had to be like, oh, okay, no, wait, we bust white drug dealers too. So I was in that first wave when they were going out into the suburbs. A kid was tripping on LSD and he shot a cop in the arm at this field party. Like it was like some crazy stuff happened, and that started the investigation on what I was doing. But then it was the suburbs like Northern Virginia, kind of upper middle class, but not like super upper middle class, you know what I'm saying? But nice area, kids would get cars when they're 15 to 16.
Sure.
I was just like selling in that area. So I was just like the dude, and as everybody went off to colleges, I would, follow them up to the colleges. I was that guy. That's what I did. I had like 15 colleges. I drove around in 5 states. And so, it was probably inevitable. So, bad timing. I had no idea because, I was in the suburbs. I was like, okay, whatever that stuff's happening, it doesn't really happen out here. People don't have guns. It's not violent. There's not gangs. But, I was wrong. So they came and got me and put the hammer down on me too.
Chapter 1, you get caught. Then what happens?
Literally, I'm like 20 years old. And so they're like, you need to cooperate or you're going to do 20 to life. Like for non-violent cannabis, like I don't even think I'm a criminal, I consider myself an outlaw. They threaten these big sentences, get you to cooperate. So, but also I thought I was a smart kid, probably I thought I was smarter than I really was. I was full of confidence. So I told the feds, I said, I will cooperate. And they gave me a personal recognizance bond. They thought I was going to like bring people and bust them and make cases for them. They thought I was like, I don't know, the golden goose. I gave them lip service to get out. And then as soon as I could, I took off. As it came out, they felt like I outsmarted them or a young kid, like I, played them or whatever. So that's why they went after me so strong. And they made me like a top 15 U.S. Marshals list. I don't carry guns. I got no violence, like nothing. I'm just like this weed LSD dealer at colleges. And all of a sudden, these dudes like make me top 15. And it was
Mm-hmm.
all out of retribution because I left a black mark.
Before fleeing Virginia, Ferranti had one last job to do: fake his death. By leaving a suicide note in his car, throwing his clothes and wallet into the intense rapids of the Potomac River, and alerting 2 hikers of a bridge jumper before heading to the airport, Ferranti attempted to cover all his bases before flying cross-country. But this master plan had one fatal flaw. Ferranti had tossed his clothes off the wrong side of the dam, and after authorities spent 2 weeks searching the adjacent river for a body, they labeled his suicide a hoax.
How did you take off? What was your plan?
Well, I had a little money. So I was going to go to California. That's where I grew up, California. I was going to chill for a little bit, but I was going to try to get like a good permanent ID, like that I could get a passport for. So even before I became a fugitive, I read all these books about getting fake ID. So, back then it wasn't even identity theft. It was like you would only get a charge if you used the ID in a different name for fraudulent purposes. So I figured out through these books, how to get the real IDs. Probably the most famous book they sold was like the Anarchist Cookbook.
The Anarchist Cookbook, written by William Powell and published in 1971, is exactly what its title suggests: a series of recipes for defying law and order. Its legality was questionable, as it featured instructions on how to manufacture explosives, manipulate phone systems, and produce illicit substances.
So I read all these books. I read like 25 books on like how to establish fake ID. And then I just started going right to the DMV. I'd get the paperwork I needed. So, I would comb the obituaries. I would find a birth certificate, someone under 5 who died in one state and was born in another, because they don't cross-reference birth certificates. Once you get the birth certificate, you're home free. Yeah, so I did that. I had a bunch of fake ID. I was out in LA, and I was a drug dealer. So I was spending money like I was a drug dealer, but I wasn't making any money.
Hmm.
So I would like went broke real quick. I had to do something, right? And I was just not like a working a normal job type of dude. I've always like made money off my ideas or business or whatever. I went to Texas. I hooked up with my old weed connect, the Mexican dude, and I started getting weed again. I was selling in Texas. At that time, Texas, being right on the border, was kind of flooded with a brick pot. You couldn't really sell it there. But then I met some people from Missouri, and I started taking the train to Missouri, and I started making a little money. I mean, I didn't know I was a top 15 U.S. Marshal Assist Most Wanted few. I had no idea. I'd watched all the shows, like America's Most Wanted or Unsolved Mysteries. And I saw like sometimes serial killers, it would take like 3-4 months to match up their prints, right? So I was like, to match my prints up in NCIC, if anything happened, it's probably going to take a long time because who am I? Right. So, but at the same time, I was real stupid because here I'm a federal fugitive and I'm still selling drugs at the height of the war on drugs, thinking I'm going to get away with this. So I was bold, brash, reckless, did what I did, and ended up where I ended up. At the time, you couldn't have told me anything different. So, but eventually, I got busted again. They matched up my prints, um, and they extradited me back to Virginia. Where my case was out of, and like they matched up my prints, and like they knew who I was like in 3 days because I just got arrested on a state thing. I had fake ID. So they let me out, but then I was trying to get everything together, and they had like the Midwest Fugitive Task Force were like hot on my trail. It was like crazy. Finally, they found me in a motel with like 20 pounds of pot and a couple $1,000s. I was just trying to dump that pot so I could get out of there again, but they got me before I could get rid of it all.
So how long in total were you on the run?
Almost 2 years.
And so that was between the ages of like 20 and 22?
Yeah. From 91 to 93.
So I'm getting the vibe that you're a hustler kind of kid. You're scrappy. But still, that's hard. Like, what were the challenges, the unexpected or expected challenges that you faced while you were on the lam and adrift that way?
Like, you can't be who you are.
Hmm.
You can't talk to anybody that you talk to, like even my parents. Me and my mom had set up some like codes, like I did like with payphones and stuff where she could call like from payphone to payphone at like certain time periods. So we had like codes that we would send back and forth in the mail or like through, one of my other relatives. So, but I couldn't call her. Basically, I had to be whoever the ID said I am. And I had a bunch of different IDs, and sometimes I would switch them. So it's like some paranoia. It was like some cloak and dagger, especially the first 6 months, because I'm staying in LA and I just rented a room from someone, paying cash. I was like super paranoid. The feds just crashed my whole world. So, I'm thinking like they got superpowers or something. They know everything,
Mm-hmm.
even though, I learned later everything they mostly know through informants. At that time, like I'm thinking like, they're like right on me. I mean, they don't even have cell phones and, but I'm like, they could track me. That's how I was thinking. I got more used to it. The more I separated myself from the event, the paranoia went away. I think a lot of times my identity was based on making money. So if I wasn't making money or doing something or making something happen, like I felt less of myself.
Hmm.
You can never be yourself. You can't, be in touch with your loved ones. You can't slip up. You're lying to people all the time.
Hmm.
It's like your whole existence is a facade, It's like you put on this mask. Okay, this is this person and this is how these people know me, and at that point I wasn't willing to trust anybody that much with my freedom.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've never been on the lam before, but thought about it. Like after I was acquitted and sent back home, but then I was put on trial again and I was convicted again and I was facing extradition. In the same way that a part of me imagined killing myself, another part of me was like, what if, like people were sort of wink, wink. I have a bunker in Montana where you can hide out. Like, a part of me was like, is that my life? Am I going to be like on the run from the law? Like, is that going to be my life? I think I intuited just how emotionally difficult that would be because of the isolation that it would require. And it would be indefinite. Like you would be living a life of self-imposed paranoia and isolation, and that idea that you couldn't be yourself. Like I was already facing that question even before I was facing an extradition problem and an on the lam problem. There was like coming home after being accused of a horrific crime and it being like in the news so much. I realized that like my identity wasn't even my own anymore. There was this idea of me in the world that was like a fake idea of me. And so like who I was didn't in like the public imagination didn't even correspond to who I really was. And that was so isolating and debilitating. And a lot of people who loved me suggested, hey, why don't you change your name? And I was like, but then I would be living a false life. Like I would be pretending to be someone that I'm not. And that doesn't make it any better. Like, that might make it on a superficially easier, maybe, but I still have this face. But like deep down inside of me, that means that I am sort of having to pretend that I'm not who I am, or even act like there's something wrong with who I am when there's not. I've had to go through these thought cycles before in a way that maybe not a lot of people can fully relate to. And it sounds like you sort of lived that nightmare that I just imagined might be my reality.
It's kind of like, I think like military, like when people go to war, they don't know what to expect, like any step can lead to death. And a lot of people, if you haven't been to in a lot of those life or death situations or war or been in these criminal justice situations like we have, I don't think you can really understand, because I mean, I know how I felt. Okay, I knew I was getting out and I knew I had a date, and eventually that date came. But until I got out, like I didn't really believe I was getting out.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's a defeatist attitude or our minds just, we got to accept this.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be hoping for something, that's not going to happen, because then you're just going to be upset all the time, thinking about what you don't have.
You talk about how you had this like secret code and you were able to talk to your mom. First of all, what did she think about all this? But also, were there any other people that you relied on this journey, or were you truly like on your own, picking yourself up by the bootstraps? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, I would say my mom was horrified because, she didn't think I was a bad person. And for them to like, put like I'm the Fairfax, LSD kingpin, and, write all this stuff about me in the papers, like I'm Pablo Escobar or Scarface. My mom knew me, so I think she was horrified. I'd bounce what I wanted to do, off a couple people, and my mom was one of them, and she basically told me like, go, if that's what you feel you need to do. And not only did we have the little secret phone code system, like on certain dates and stuff, like she used to mail me packages. Like I had PO boxes where I was establishing fake identities. So my mom used to make me like peanut butter brownies, just like if I was in college, and she'd make me peanut butter brownies and send
Oh,
them in a package. Yeah, but my mom was really,
oh.
really religious woman. But I mean, she loved me fiercely, and I was her little boy, and she didn't think I could do any wrong. When I got caught, yeah, I was like almost relieved that I could be myself again.
Hmm.
That I could call my mom. But I had one friend. I had a friend, Zane Mays, who I went to high school with him in Virginia. He was down in Arlington, Texas, going to University of Texas, and so I went down there. And him and his girlfriend, they were from Virginia, so they knew about me. They knew I was a case. They knew I was a fugitive. So they helped me out. Zane actually, I think he got a probation case. I don't think he got any Fed time, but he actually, like, for aiding and abetting a fugitive, because the U.S. Marshals found out. Yeah. So just for being my friend, he got a federal case. No, and I haven't talked to him since. I told him if it did come to that, I told him, go ahead and inform on me, say whatever, but you don't have to do a sentence, for helping me.
And you haven't talked to him since?
I haven't talked to him since. People move on with their lives. I was in prison for so long.
In 1993, Seth Ferranti was finally caught. He was extradited back to Virginia, and his fugitive life came to an end. At trial, prosecutors claimed Ferranti had sold 100,000 hits of LSD within 3 months. He pled guilty, and at 22 years old, he was convicted on one of the highest drug charges in the U.S., Code 848, Continuing Criminal Enterprise, which holds a minimum 20-year sentence.
It's called CCE, Continual Criminal Enterprise. It's like just an ongoing drug conspiracy where they say like I managed like 5 people and I was a kingpin and all this stuff. But since I fled and I didn't testify against anybody or cooperate with them, they gave me obstruction of justice. So that added 52 more months to my sentence. So I got 292 months. That's like 24 years and something.
What did it feel like when you got that sentence?
Oh, well, when you get it, right? Because they say it like that, like 292, right? So they're like 292 months. And I'm like, oh, 292 months. And I'm like, that's not bad. But then I'm like, wait, I'm like, 12, 12, 12. How many 12s are in 292? Like, that's
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
and then once I figured it out, it was like, 24 years, 8 months or something like that. I don't know. But, yeah, I was like, man, because I was 22. That was like, I had more time than how old I was. And they weren't done. They came with another 4-count indictment for when I was a fugitive for like a failure to appear, fraudulent use of ID because they didn't have identity theft. I pled guilty to the failure to appear and to the fraudulent use of ID. And they gave me 12 more months. And they didn't even run that 12 months concurrent. They run it consecutive. So then that got me up to 304 months, which was 25 years, 4 months when I was 22. And the feds, you got to do 85% of your time.
So what did that mean?
Then I had to do like, I don't know, 22 years.
Did you do 22 years?
I did 21. I got 10 months off for this drug program at the end. So yeah, I did 21. So I did almost 85% of my time.
Almost spent as much time in prison as you were alive at the time that you were arrested.
Prison was that was like the second chapter, if we're going by chapters, or the second act.
Yeah, Act 2. Let's talk about Act 2.
I don't know, man. When you're that young and you got that much prison time, like staring you in the face. I mean, any in prison, any time in prison, you're just like, what the fuck? You're like, this is bullshit. This shit sucks. Like, can't do nothing about it. You're stuck. Yeah, you can have supporters on the outside. You can have lawyers, but still, you're the one stuck in there. You're the one that has to deal with it. I had to grow up to become a man. I was like a little spoiled mommy's boy. You know what I'm saying? Not like I had a silver spoon in my mouth, but my parents were middle class, military, so going in there, it was like culture shock. I had to go in there, I had to prove who I was. I had to prove myself. Luckily, I've always played sports. I'm not really big, but I'm like 6'1", 215. So I got a little size. And even when I first went in, I was, I wasn't as big. I was probably like 185, but I still had played sports. I was athletic. It's weird, like in prisons, like in a men's prison, like, you get kudos for like being a good athlete. That's like admired, because you got like that alpha male thing. Obviously the number one thing is if you could fight.
It's almost like they infer that you could fight because you're fit enough to play sports.
Yeah, that's what they do. That's what they do. I was out in the mix, like what they call the mix. And, most prison systems are like 5 levels, basically like a minimum, camp, a low, medium, a high, and then like a super max, So I started in like what people, you'd say level 3, like a medium. They called them gladiator school. So you just had to fight, People weren't getting stabbed a lot, definitely people weren't getting killed. But, people were getting beat up. Your skin color is like your flag. That's how everything's broken down. It's all broken down by race. And then after race, it's all broken down geographical, or by gangs. I learned a lot of stuff. I played sports. I stayed out of the way. When I first came in, they had Pell Grants where the government was actually paying for prisoners to go to school, like college. So I started doing that. And I was in Manchester, Kentucky. It was like a brand new prison. And there were actually teachers coming from Eastern Kentucky University every night. So I got like my first 24 college credits. Eventually, I went in through correspondence, which my parents paid for. I got an AA degree from Penn State. I got a bachelor's degree from University of Iowa, and I got a master's degree from California State University. But this was over the years. I mean, I started in 93. I didn't get the master's till like 2010. So that was kind of like my educational journey. From being in the law library, typing up stuff for my college classes all the time, guys that I was playing sports with were always bringing me like administrative remedies, grievous forms, because, you're supposed to type them up. So, guys would ask me like black dudes, Spanish dudes, Mexican dudes, whoever, Colombian, Jamaican, if I played sports with them, they see me typing, I would start typing them up. So eventually, after a couple years of doing that, I became like a jailhouse lawyer, but only for like in-house stuff, not for like legal cases.
Sure.
For like administrative remedies and stuff like that. Like I would get dudes their good time back. I would give them their phone time back. Like if they lost it, for a violation, I would help to get dudes transferred. I would help to get their visits back. Move units, get into a program, all stuff like that you could do like through the administrative remedy process in the Bureau of Prisons.
We called those domandinas, and he had a very specific language that you were supposed to use. We didn't have the ability to type them up, but you had to be able to write it. Half the people that I was imprisoned with didn't know how to read or write. Like, that was the culture shock for me, was like, not only was I in a foreign country where everyone is speaking an entirely different language the entire time, but also like I was a college-educated kid living in a space where half the people didn't even know how to read or write. And like, that was kind of my hustle too, is like I would read and write for people and do their domandinas, or I would help them do requests from commissary and all that kind of stuff, read their court documents for them, talk to the guards or the doctors for them, because a lot of them were foreigners in my prison. Like, good portion of them didn't even know how to speak Italian. So I had to like figure out what they needed and try to translate for them. Did you figure all of this out, like this way to live through this, pretty early on, or was it a long process of figuring out what this prison world was and how you fit into it?
I'd say it took me, probably like a good 2 years to figure it out. And like I say, I mean, it was a violent place, but it wasn't like gang infested, and it was more like homeboy type of stuff. So I tried different stuff. Like you meet dudes and they're like, oh, like you should, get your apprenticeship for carpentry, go work in the wood shop. Like you should go to the horticulture, because they do got different programs where you can learn trades. I worked in the kitchen. I had like all the different jobs. I kind of ran through the gamut. Yeah, eventually I ended up in recreation as a clerk, because I was down there playing sports all the time. So I started, I would like keep the books like at a basketball game or something. And then eventually I got that into a clerk where at a couple different spots, like I had like my own office, my own typewriter, like everything.
Well.
Yeah, I just had to do like little newspaper stuff for the sports and, like some purchase orders, like if the recreational, officers need stuff, I'm supposed to type it up. But a lot of them, they didn't really bother me. They just let me do my own thing. But prison sucks. I mean, really, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But still, it's like, you're just trying to find like the easiest path, like the easiest way, do the time. Don't let the time do you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that one means it's like, set your agenda, set what you want to do. So I kind of look with my education and working out and everything else, even helping people, that was my giving back to the community. I kind of looked at it as, like you could take a sabbatical in the belly of the beast. The mental perspective, I had to do to get through, but also when I was in there, I was, about halfway through my bid. That's when I started reaching out, and trying to become a writer.
One of the things that I hear about pretty frequently from people is that you can learn a trade at certain kinds of prisons here in the US, and that was not really available at my prison. There was a lot of just sitting around doing nothing because there was nothing to do. There were people I would describe what a typical day for me would look like and like what I would do to occupy the time. And I'd be like, well, I do a bunch of reading. I go outside for an hour or two when we have the, aria, when we can go to the yard. I'll go and run for an hour or two. And then I go back to my room and I read some more. Then lights out happens. I did a lot of reading. And like, there are some friends of mine who are like, man, I know you're in prison, but that sounds kind of great. I would love to have time to read. And I always was like, well, that's one way to look at it. And I also would not wish prison upon my worst enemy. And I think when people hear about things like horticulture class or, the wood shop or lots of time to do reading, they think, oh, like it's just like taking a sabbatical. Can you talk about the other side of that sabbatical and what it is that you do not wish upon your worst enemy of that experience?
No privacy, like zero privacy. Sometimes like bathroom stalls don't even have doors. Sometimes showers have like a wall that covers like half your body, if that, like your private areas. Like being in a prison block is like, I tell people it's like the din of a stadium, the constant noise, the constant hum of people talking and it reverberating off the block, or the bars or the stone or the walls or whatever. It's just like constant.
Yeah, I wore earplugs all the time.
Yeah. It just doesn't go away. It doesn't matter what, it's a prison thing. It doesn't matter what prison you're in, what county jail. Because I've been in a ton of county jails, I've been in a ton of transit units, and I've been in 8 different federal prisons. It doesn't matter where you're at. You're not a person in there. You're a number. Like I will know my federal prison registration number for the rest of my life. 18205-083. I can repeat that back just like I can say my name, my birthday, my social security number. I will never ever, lose that, because in there, that's what you are. You're just a number. You're not a name. You're not a person. That's like they want to know, like, what's your number? What's your number? Inmate number. Comes back to that identity thing, and they want to strip your identity away. They just want you to be a name. You're not a name, a number. Everybody wears the same type of clothes, same colors. Even at commissary, you can only get the same stuff. I mean, the food is awful. I mean, the conditions are awful. I mean, there's some okay people in prison. I have some good people in prison I still correspond with, but there's a lot of scammers. There's a lot of people that are no good. There's a lot of people that'll, try to beat you for your last dollar. I mean, it's degrading, it's dehumanizing, especially like when they put you in transit or they move you in and out of some place, or even when you go to court, just all the strip searches. You got to change clothes, get stripped. You got to bend over, cough, like just all this stuff, man. It's like degrading, what you got to go through. I understand why they have those security measures because, a lot of prisoners, try to bend the rules or do whatever they can and, exploit the system, but I mean, that's what criminals are going to do when you cage them up. They're not going to stop being criminals. I was at USP Lewisburg, which is a famous prison. It's known as like a transit. They run people like it's a transit place. And they would run us through the R&D, like the receiving and discharge, and they would make us all strip at once. So you would have like a whole bus full, like 40 dudes standing in line, like super close to each other. You know what I'm saying? Because they only give you a small spot because they got to see everybody, butt naked, waiting, to get, strip search, bend over, cough, and then you go through the other side of R&D and they give you some clothes and lock you. But, dogs are treated better.
One of the things that was really hard for me, and I'm curious if you felt this, it felt like prison made my world and my possibilities in life so small, and it really limited the kind of like meaningful relationships that I could have. Because even as much as like my family did everything that they possibly could to be there for me, the reality was I only got one 10-minute phone call a week, and I only got 6 hours of visitation a month, and only certain people could even come and visit me. And it felt like my life had been like lost down in this like deep, deep hole where no one could reach me. And as time went on, they would only drift further and further away. And then, like, because my world was so small and I only had what was available to me within this very limited environment, when I finally would get out, I would be so estranged from the reality that I had been away from that I felt like I would never really fit in again. And I would have lost some of the things that I had really hoped for in my life. Like, I was a 20-year-old facing a 26-year sentence. I was like, well, that means I'm never going to be a mom because let's be real, like I have a clock on that. And that was something that was so important to me that was gone. And like, who would want to marry me and start a family with somebody who was convicted of murder and like got out when they were 46 years old? Like, all of those things were going on in my head. And that feeling of like deep grief for the life that could have been led was something that stayed with me. And I'm curious to know if you felt impacted similarly.
I would say for the first 5 years I was locked up, like I played like all those, could have beens, would have beens, like what if I roll back the clock, like what if I did this at this time,
Mm,
and I just went through all those things, and like I'm telling you, for 5 years, probably like my subconscious, my conscious, my dreams.
mm,
I remember when I first got locked up, I would have these dreams like I was on the street still, doing whatever, sometimes doing some reckless stuff, chaotic, whatever. But like I was out there and it'd be like this bullet ride and it seemed so real, then when I would wake up in a prison and I would think that was like a dream. But I think after 5 years, I just kind of accepted it. I was like, this is my lot in life. Like what can I do? Because my family, like, everybody got master's degrees, like that's expected, even though I was like the black sheep, I still felt, obligation, like that was expected of me. Also I got into the writing. I think that acceptance kind of, gave me a stage. I was just like, I can't dwell on this. I got to live here. I got to be here now. If I want to be a writer, I got to learn to be a writer from these college courses, and I got to start writing,
mm-hmm.
and, I got to get the word out. That time too, I started reading these books because I read a ton. I was the type of dude, I would have like 5 books I'm reading. I would read really to escape, for boredom or just, to kind of isolate myself sometimes. If people see you reading a book, they'll leave you alone. But the reading the books led to my writing. My first 2 years, I read a lot of books like on prison, like prison literature, like every prison book I could find. I would call my mom and ask her to, get it from the bookstore and send it. Or even like other prisoners had a lot of stuff. So, and we had a library too,
Mm-hmm.
and you could do like interlibrary loans. So I was just reading like In the Belly of the Beast, Jack Henry Abbott, Soledad Brother, George Jackson, Life from Death Row, just any.
Mm,
I was just like reading,
mm-hmm.
as much prison literature stuff about prison, because really it was almost like an education
Mm-hmm.
for me too. Because I'm the type of person when I get into something, I just like immerse myself in it. So kind of my reading about prison to kind of give myself some knowledge of what I was having to experience every day. With like mafia dudes and gangbangers and gun thugs and mobsters, drug addicts, foreign nationals, cartel guys. This is who I had to deal with every day. So yeah, I think I gave myself a grounding, and it inspired me to do my own writing.
You mentioned earlier that up until the moment you were released, you didn't really feel like you would be released. And then one day you were. Can you tell me about that day?
My wife picked me up. We cheated the system a little bit because, if you tell them you're going to go on the bus, like they give you more time. So, I said out, like, or if you say my wife's going to pick me up, they'll give you like however many hours it takes to get there, but if you go at the bus, because the buses take longer, you get more hours. So, of course I said, yeah, I'm going on the bus. I need that 12-hour pass. And, my wife picked me up and, only took 5 hours to get, to where we had to go, but you got to take a little allowances.
Seth met his wife, Diane, in St. Louis in 1993, the same year of his arrest. Diane didn't know Seth's real name at the time of his capture, but she remained with him throughout his sentence. The two tied the knot at Gilmer Federal Correctional Institution in 2005.
I went right to the halfway house. It's like a work release. That was like the last 6 months of my sentence would be that. But, it's basically being free. I remember going into Walmart. And, like when you're in prison, you just do your commissary list and you put it in and they give you like whatever. And like you're lucky if you got a choice of like crunchy or creamy peanut butter, usually it's whatever they got.
Right.
Right. So I go there and I'm like in the peanut butter aisle and I'm just like looking and there's like so many choices and it was like a sensory overload. When I first got out, I didn't even want to go in stores because there was too many choices. I couldn't decide.
I totally relate to that. I remember going to the store and just being like, oh my God, there are so many flavors of Top Ramen. Like, what is happening right now?
No, it was crazy, right? It's like sensory. I mean, you just, for 21 years, I just write something and put it in a slot. Because like in a men's prison, I'm like a normal sized dude, because they got like big dudes. So, and like I say, I'm like 6'1", whatever, 215. But I'm like a normal sized dude in there, right? So when I got out, around women and children, a lot of women and children where I might be like only a couple men. And that was awkward for me at first. Just being around because I felt so big. I had a job out of the halfway house at a restaurant, and it was the dude who was the restaurant manager. He was actually ex-con who one of my friends had hooked me up with to get a job here in the St. Louis area. But, I was a new guy, so I was always getting cut first. So usually after the dinner rush, I'd be cut by 9. And that's what I used to do a lot of times. I would go to like Walmart or a store, and I would just walk around to try to get myself used to like, looking at stuff and being around people. And I did that for like, probably like 3 months, like every night I would just stop in the store, walk around. I'm not even buying nothing. I'm just like walking around, like trying to get used to it.
I did that too. Ah!
Crazy, right?
A lot of walking around. I love like the whole walking around a store thing too, because it's like you're around people, but you don't necessarily have to talk to them, because that can feel really overwhelming. It's just like taking tentative steps towards being around people and like having purpose. And everyone else is like bustling along doing their own thing, but you're still sort of like, you're in the midst of them, like, so I hear that.
I used to practice, like I would go up and like ask somebody like, where can I find this? Just to talk to like the store people, just to get used to it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And sometimes I might have to psych myself up. I like, go ask her, where's the peanut butter aisle? Or whatever. Yeah, because I didn't want to ask anybody nothing.
Did you feel like an alien in the world? I mean, I know for me, and this may be peculiar to my situation because when I came home, there was like media following me around everywhere. So I definitely felt like I was still sort of like under the spotlight in a way, and I was still very estranged from the rest of humanity for a long time. But did you also carry that with you?
Yeah, definitely different. Someone else has been in jail, you can relate to them because you've experienced something that, most of the population hasn't experienced. However much I want to block it out, compartmentalize it, whatever. I mean, that's 21 years of my life. And basically, like a hellhole that I did the best I can in. But, I do feel different because of those experiences. See, that's why a lot of my friends are like ex-cons, but, they're people doing stuff in entertainment or trying to do the right thing. I know a lot of people that are doing other stuff too, but I don't really associate with them.
What life have you rebuilt on the other side of this experience? And do you feel lost still, or do you feel like you found your way?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like every time you feel like you're almost there and then you get lost again. I think that's just a life thing. It seems like no matter what you do or what you accomplish, it seems like you're always getting, knocked off or knocked down or for whatever reason, even if you only feel it yourself. I feel I've made some progress. I got out. I was already writing. I'd already published some books. I was already like a national, basically like kind of true crime journalist. So I came out to that. Print media, it just like since I got out, it just like went to nothing. What they pay you now, like I was getting paid more in prison. Now, I don't know how these journalists make it now. Now they got AI. It's going to start writing everything for them. So I did books. I got 25 books out now. And then, I had a dream. I wanted to make film. I had an opportunity. I made this film, White Boy, about white boy Rick and the injustice of Rick Wershe's case, which is on Netflix, a documentary. I made it with this guy named Sean Reck in Transition Studios. I had access for the story, and I had written about Rick's case on Vice News and some other places. It was based off like my work, but Sean took it and did amazing things with it. And he kind of took me under his wing as a producer and a writer, taught me a lot. So it was an honor to learn under him. I mean, I got an education in documentary filmmaking that, on the business side and how to make them that you can't even get in college. So it led to other stuff, my own stuff, my own film studio, Outlaw Films, where I got 3 things on Amazon now. I got a beautiful film about a group of violence interrupters in North St. Louis called Nightlife, where we follow them around with cameras for like 2 years. I got this other film called Dope Men, America's First Drug Cartel, which is about the mafia and heroin. It goes all the way back to Prohibition and shows how the Italian mob was forming America's first drug cartel before Prohibition even ended. And I got another one called Psychedelic Revolution, The Secret History of the LSD Trade, which, goes back and looks at the discovery of LSD and how people thought it was like this wonder drug. And then, how it was outlawed in 1966 and then all, the outlaw stuff and the Grateful Dead. I'll probably be dropping like, 3 or 4 more things this year.
So you're ever the hustler.
Hey, I'm trying to build, man. I'm trying to build. I feel like I got a late start. I did what I can in there, but I feel that clock ticking too. I want to do narratives, I'm doing this true crime stuff right now because it's in my wheelhouse. It's what I've, experienced. It's what I've lived. It's the people I know and people are interested in it. But, in the next couple of years, I want to start doing narratives. I fashioned myself kind of like a Quentin Tarantino, Guy Ritchie, writer, director. So I want to do like crime films, but I want to take them in my worlds, my counterculture, the scenes I was involved with, kind of explore those. Like in a big Hollywood type film.
What does your mom think about this chapter of your life?
Sadly, my mom passed like last summer, but she was, she was enjoying my successes. She saw White Boy. She was really happy for me, and my mom, she always wanted to be a writer. She always thought she was going to be a famous writer, but then real life, kids and stuff, and motherhood got in the way. So, and she was from a different era too. She grew up in the 50s and the 50s and early 60s, where what women could or couldn't do, they were expected to be more in the house. And she was always happy for me because that's what she wanted to be.
You can find links to all of Seth Ferranti's films at guerrillaconvict.com and his writing in numerous publications such as Vice News, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times. He encourages you to leave film reviews as they bolster independent filmmakers.
Thanks for listening to this old school episode from the archives. And please subscribe at amandaknox.substack.com to get ad-free episodes of Hard Knocks, subscriber-only essays, live video hangouts, and more. Subscribers can also submit questions for my Ask Amanda Anything episodes. Don't be shy, really. You can ask me anything. Again, that's amandaknox.substack.com. Hope to see you there.